built up about the time of us joining the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. So around 2010, they started construction on all those. But this building here, the visitor center, the one we started in, that is the one historic building on site. This building dates back to about 1850, and it served as Lexington's ice house for a period of time. At one point in the ice house's history, I was told it caught on fire, which is really ironic for me to think about. It's a brick building full of ice catching on fire, but they were using a bunch of sawdust to keep the big blocks of ice separate. I guess somebody was smoking a cigarette nearby, ember flew off, sparked the sawdust. I think the problem kind of solved itself, at least. This little tea house here, we do own it. They are going to make it into a tea house, like a sandwich shop, a little cafe. But right now, it's where you can come hang out, grab a flight of beers, hang out on our patio. We'll have food trucks and music sometimes in the summertime on the weekends. Cool spot to hang.
Ooh. There's a certain way they can turn you.
All right, folks. So this little area here, this is kind of our back of house area. It's also a blending area. We don't have a rick house here on site. And a rick house are those long-term storage facilities. These metal clusters are ricks in between. They're also made out of wood most of the time. So a big warehouse full of these barrels is a rick house. And we don't have a rick house on site because we're smack dab in the middle of Lexington. And in recent years past, if one of those buildings collapses or catches on fire, that is a big disaster we don't need happening here in the city. Turns out bourbon's flammable. Who knew? You knew? Wow. So what we do instead of having all here, we ship all of our barrels out to Castle and Key Distillery. Castle and Key is one of the newer players on the Kentucky Bourbon Trail. They're a lot farther out in the country, outside of Versailles, Frankfurt area. And inside that rick house we rent space from, they're going to stack these barrels up to 16 tiers high. So you can see in here a stack of 4 is pretty tall. You take this stack of 4, you multiply it by 4, and you can kind of start to picture how big that building is going to be. On a hot summer day, it's going to be very hot, very warm, muggy inside that rick house because we lose a lot of moisture in these barrels to evaporation, to the air. We call that form of loss to the air the angel's share. We let the angels have their share. But there's another form of loss called the devil's cut. Both sides get a taste, but the devil, we don't let him have his taste. We steal from the devil. The devil's cut is what gets soaked into the wood of the barrel. It's about 2 to 3 gallons over the years of aging that gets soaked into the wood. And we're stealing from the devil because when we empty this barrel of whiskey, we fill it right back up with good beer. And then when we roll that full barrel of beer in a cold cooler, it's going to cause all the wood to constrict. And it's going to squeeze out all that trapped bourbon, all that trapped alcohol straight into the beer. So that's how you get the big spike in alcohol, and that's how you take bourbon on the back end, especially in that bourbon barrel ale. We get a total of 4 uses out of our barrel. We always use it first for bourbon because that's part of the law. It's got to be a brand new American white oak charred barrel for you to call your spirit a bourbon. So first for bourbon, then we'll use the barrel a second time for the beer, specifically the bourbon barrel ale, the seasonal beers, the milk stout, all those beers that spike up really high to over 8%. That's because it's soaking up all that devil's cut. Third time we use the barrel is for the cream ales. So the vanilla, the tangerine, that's still a barrel-aged beer, but I guarantee if you tasted it, you didn't taste any bourbon in it. That's because the previous use of the barrel takes out a lot of the fun. It just gives those cream ales a nice oaky, soft finish to them. And then the fourth and final time we're going to use that barrel is for single malt whiskeys. Either the single malts that we produce here in Lexington, or the single malt whiskey that we produce and distill over in Dublin, Ireland. After that fourth use, we're officially done with that barrel. A lot of them go to Scotland for Scotch whiskeys. Some of them go to wineries for barrel finishing on some red wines and stuff. Or they're just sold on the open market and they're turned into bar stools, countertops, cool guitars like the one we got back in the visitor center. Pretty much whatever the artist can picture. He can take that usable piece of art, turn it into another usable piece of art. Now with the angel share, there's going to be a fuzzy stuff that starts to grow on the barrel. They start out new, but the straps in that rick house are going to rust up really quick. They're just iron straps. It's a humid environment. And then you get all this black fuzzy stuff that's going to start to grow on the barrels, around the outside of the barrels. This is a fungus. And the fungus is feeding on the angel share. Makes it a really good indicator for age. You can infer that the darker and fuzzier the barrel is, the longer it's sitting in that environment with all those alcohol vapors, the longer time it was in storage. So the first barrels that we filled were in 2008. We started bottling up some of those at the end of last year. We've got a bottle back in the visitor center that is a 15-year-old single malt whiskey bottled in bond. You guys don't get to taste that one for free on the tour today, I'm sorry. They're charging about $400 a bottle for that, so they don't like giving it away for free. But it's a really good spirit if you like the sample, especially more Scotch-like spirits. But a lot of these barrels in here, they're from 2014, 15, 16. A lot of them are being used for blending nowadays. So if you guys want to follow me up here just a little bit, we do our blends here, but we also do single barrel selections. So that's like if you own a liquor store or a country club and you like Town Branch, you want your own special run of Town Branch single barrel bourbon with your name on the label. What you could do is send us a representative and we would pull down 3 or 4 of these fully aged bourbons. And then you have a whole tasting experience. You get to taste from each of the barrels. You get to pick which one you like the best. Because everybody's palate is different and every barrel is going to be different depending on where it spends its time at. So it's really cool you get to try before you buy. Usually the question of price comes up as a question. The sad thing is I can't just roll a full barrel of bourbon into your front yard and you give me a big wad of cash in return. That's illegal as it turns out. For us to do it the legal way, the proper, correct way, we're going to bottle up all these contents first, and then we can process that sale. And if we're talking contents of a bourbon barrel, one aged 5 to 7 years, we typically expect about 180 bottles up to 210 bottles of bourbon to come out of that barrel. So you can take 200 as an even number in between that range. 200 at our retail price puts you in the ballpark of $10,000 for a full barrel of bourbon. But that's retail price. When you're getting a whole barrel, you're getting a wholesale rate. Knock a few thousand off of that. If you guys have like 5 or 6K collecting dust on a coffee table somewhere, I'd say go ahead and invest it. And just remember your new friend Austin, whenever you do. It's only fair. So if you do a single barrel selection, you do get the barrel that your stuff was aged in, and you get all your cases of whiskey that came out of that barrel. So really, if you wanted to, you could just fill it back up, roll it somewhere, and let it age for a little bit longer. When we are doing single barrels, all of our stuff is hand bottled and hand labeled. And when we're doing single barrels, it'll all be done right at the end of that table where we've got 6 purple handles on those taps. Guys will stand out here, it'll be about 5 or 6 of them, and we'll just fill up those bottles that come out of the barrel. Most of our bottling is now done out of cask and heat. We're aging our spirits out there. It just kind of makes sense as far as the numbers to go ahead and use their stills and bottle up some of our stuff, and still some of our stuff over there as well. We do all of our single malt whiskeys still here on site though.
How do you guys ship? Like on a truck?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lay them or stand them up?
Well, stand them up.
Stand them up?
Yeah. Just for sake of transport, and then they roll them down. Sometimes they'll fork this whole rick into the truck. It just kind of depends on who's doing it, how big of a load they've got. Let's go into this next room, guys. It's going to open up. It's going to get really pretty. We're going to talk about how it's all distilled, and then we're going to talk about how it all tastes.
Cross those lines. Yeah, it's not a hot tub. It would look like it'd be a good one.
Now this tank here, this is an open air fermenter. Right now this is just water on the inside. Nothing cool's happening right now. We do still use these tanks. The water does serve a purpose. It's the only thing that holds all of this together.
Right.
It's kind of like a bourbon barrel. Straps keep the shape. The weight is pushing out, keeping the wood wet and saturated. That creates the seal in between all the slats of wood.
Right.
There's no glue or nail that holds it all together. So if you let it sit empty, you can just come in here after a day and just push in all these wood slats. When we are using this tank will fill up from this valve down here with the sweet stuff that we get from the brewery. So if we're making a single malt whiskey, we're going to cook all barley back in the brewery. We're going to filter out all the solids. Solids go on a truck, make all the animals happy. The sweet liquid comes over here. The tank will fill up from that valve at the bottom, and then the distiller is going to toss some yeast right on top. The yeast will start to do their magic. They're alive, very small, but they love sugar. So they start chowing down, makes the yeast very full and gassy. So when we're using these, this top will be like an oatmeal color, and it's going to be full of bubbles, big and small, really churning around. It'll look like it's at a boil, but it's all biological, just yeast being gassy. They'll feel like hot tubs because they're producing heat as a byproduct, and the whole room will smell fantastic when we're using these because we produce alcohol using these. This is the old school way of doing it. The new school way is stainless steel and closed environment. It's a little bit more efficient, but same kind of concept.
You're still making these though.
Yeah.
Neat.
Now, usually it takes about 4 days of the yeast doing their magic, and then we can start to distill. So after the yeast start to die down, it develops what we call a crust on top. Essentially the bubbles just stop and it starts to look like there's a solid layer on top. At that point, now we know we're ready to distill. So the tank will empty out from that valve on the other side from me, and it goes underneath us. There's a whole story below us. It'll get piped over into our 2 copper pot stills. Now, our pot stills that we use here, you will see on the lids it says Scotland. They were imported from Scotland. There's irony with the stills because we've got a similar setup over in Dublin. But the stills that we use in Dublin, Ireland, were manufactured in Louisville, Kentucky. And the stills we use in Lexington, Kentucky were made in Scotland. So with a little bit of foresight about opening up an Irish whiskey distillery, Pierce could have saved a lot of money in shipping these big copper monstrosities across the pond. But it ties our 2 places together, which is pretty neat. Now what distillation is, at its essence, you guys aren't going to be experts in this by the time I talk about it, but distillation is separating liquids. I need to go back to school to get all that. So we separate liquids based on the boiling point. Every liquid's got a different boiling point. What we're trying to do is separate all the alcohol out of all that liquid. We're trying to just get pure alcohol out. We take our fermented stuff, we put it into our bigger of the 2 stills, the wash still, and hot stills operate like tea kettles, laying center here. You apply heat in the base of the tea kettle, and around 170 degrees Fahrenheit, alcohol is going to start to boil. The alcohol vapor is going to rise up that main column. It's going to go across that horizontal line up top back toward me. And then it enters the vertical line. The vertical line straight up and down going into the peninsula line. And that's where we take that hot alcohol vapor. We go through a really rapid temperature change. That's going to bring from the vapor back down to the liquid. That liquid alcohol that we get off in one still is called the low lines. Low lines are low in proof. About 25% alcohol or 50 proof. That's really not much anything when it comes to insipid spirits. So this is where we have a second still. We take this alcohol, low lines, we move it into the small still. We do it all over again. You apply heat, the alcohol goes up, we bring it back down into a liquid. Once it has gone through 2 distillations though, the distiller's gonna have to use his expertise. He's gotta separate the alcohol coming off of the still. And the reason he has to do that, the first bit that we get is called the heads. First bit to roll off the still. The heads are strong, alcohol-wise, but they also contain acetone and methanol. If you guys ever heard those stories of moonshiners going blind, that's where these stories originate from. They saw whiskey coming off the still. They knew how to make whiskey. They just didn't get that first bit came with all that extra stuff. They were drinking it, drinking a lot of it, was not a good outcome. So we're not trying to go blind here. We're just gonna let this stuff run off for about 20 minutes or so. And then the good stuff comes off the still. The good stuff here is called the hearts. Hearts are fully distilled, White Dog, White Lightning, Moonshine, Distillate, goes by a lot of different names. But the hearts are your base for your whiskeys. So coming off the still, it's always gonna be nice and clear. But with the bourbon, you're gonna put this clear spirit in a brand new American white oak charred barrel. And that charred barrel is where all the color comes from. It's also where all the flavor and depth of flavor comes from. You'll go from nice and clear like this to all the nice dark and amber honey colors that you see around the bar that we're gonna get to in just a second. So hearts are the good stuff. The last little bit that rolls off the still is called the tails, at the tail end of the distillation. The tails are weak, they're oily, they're a little bit cloudy. None of those are great properties in a whiskey. So we've got to figure out what to do with these extremities. We're keeping all the hearts. We're putting those into barrels and turning them into nice bottles. But we've got heads that make you go blind, and we've got tails that are weak and oily. We don't want either one of those. So what we did a couple of years ago, we put these two together, we put it in a bottle, and we labeled it as hand sanitizer. We passed it out to all the hospitals and schools. That's why all that stuff smelled like vodka and tequila for a little bit. Distilleries, it was a good way to keep the lights on, keep some guys employed, and to help the community. But we don't have to keep making hand sanitizer nowadays. So now what we're gonna do is we'll still put these two together, but we won't put it in its own bottle. We're gonna put that combo back into our first still, and it's gonna meet a new batch of whiskey that'll be coming into it. So our process here is very cyclical, it's very continuous. Just the broad scope is we're trying to turn all of the spirit that's coming off of the stills into the good spirit, the hearts that we can age and enjoy. That is a true crash course in whiskey making. You guys are looking a little empty-handed and thirsty once more. So if you guys want to follow me over to this horseshoe bar, yes sir.
Yeah, in your gas, what's the ratio of ethanol to methanol?
You know, I'm not totally sure on that. I'd have to ask the distiller, and he's not here today, unfortunately. I can lie to you, but I won't lie to you. I just don't know. All of these barrels are all different sizes of barrels. So what we use for bourbon is called the American Standard Whiskey Barrel. It's 53 gallons. That's what makes up the bar. It's what is on all these casters across the room. But all the other sizes, quart and pipe is used for wines and rums a lot of times. And the one that says butt on it is where the term butt load originates from. So back in the day, if you needed a butt load of sugar, you can expect 126 gallons of sugar to show up on your doorstep. So if somebody says bring a butt load of potato salad to the cookout, bring a butt load. Now I'm gonna go through all these bottles here, and we'll talk about them just like we did in beers. This is gonna be your last place to spend the tokens. So make sure you use them wisely. The first bottle here, the lightest in color, is our single malt whiskey. So the saying is that all bourbons are whiskeys, and not all whiskeys are bourbons. Whiskey is just a big umbrella that contains Irish whiskey and bourbon whiskey and Canadian whiskey and rye whiskey and so on and so forth. Bourbon's got to be mostly corn. It's got to be made in the U.S. It can't have any flavors to it. And it's got to be in a brand new American white oak charred barrel. So this here is a single malt whiskey. It is a whiskey because it's 100% malted barley. There is no corn in the recipe. It's not a majority corn. And this is also the fourth time we've used the barrel. So like I mentioned, we use it first for bourbon, twice for the beers, fourth and finally for the single malts. So this gets aged for 7 years, but it won't get dark like a bourbon would after 7 years because most of that char in the barrel has already been taken up. Stays nice and light, golden colored. Drinks most like a scotch, just doesn't have the smoky or peaty notes you typically get with Scotch whiskey. The next bottle over with this green label is our Kentucky Straight Bourbon. This is what I consider our house spirit. This is 72% corn and about equal parts rye and malted barley as the other grains going into it. To get this bottle, you're gonna age barrels for 4 to 5 years, and then you're gonna take a mixed bag, about 30 barrels, you're gonna put them all together, and you're gonna add water to that blend until it gets to 90 proof. That's how you get consistency. That way you can go to the liquor store tomorrow, you can find this bottle, and it'll taste just like you remember it, tasting just now. Either one of these first 2 bottles are great jumping off points if you get overwhelmed by the time all the bottles are talked about. The first 2 options will get your foot in the door sipping whiskey. The third bottle here is not a great starting point. This third bottle is our rye whiskey. Specifically, it is a single barrel rye whiskey. And a rye whiskey is majority rye in its recipe, like bourbon's mostly corn. Rye breads are peppery, rye whiskeys are peppery and spicy. This one is a single barrel, and where every barrel's different, you gotta look on the label for more info. This label says VC on it, which stands for Visitor Center. So the distiller brings myself and all my coworkers 3 or 4 different barrels of whiskey, and then I have the really, really tough job of going through each one of those, giving them a taste. And for you guys, I always go back through one more time, give it another taste. Nobody else does it. It's a sacrifice. I want to make sure you guys get the best.
Make that sacrifice.
Thank you. You know, somebody's got to do it. So we all get together, we vote on which one we think is the best. This one was 60.7% alcohol. So to get from percent to proof, you double that number. So this one is 121.4 proof. Not a great starting point. I'd probably hold off for your last token to give that high proof option a go. Over here, we've got some more bottles to talk about. We've got our single barrel bourbon. So this bourbon starts out the same way as our house bourbon. They go in the barrel clear, like I mentioned, but they come out looking different. Single barrel is going to be aged 5 to 7 years instead of just 4 to 5. It's one single barrel of bourbon compared to many barrels put together. And where this one has water added to it, it's always going to be 90 proof. Just like the rye single barrel, these are cask strength, so we don't add water to them. You have to do the same sort of deal. Look at the label, you've got VC, it's a tough pick. Then we've got 58.9% alcohol. Double that, it's 117.8 proof. You'd expect single barrels to be very similar in flavor to their blended counterparts, but single barrels are more robust in all their notes, and of course a little bit stronger as well. Next bottle over, double white label, is the True Cask Bourbon. This is cask strength, but it is not a single barrel. This is a cask strength blend of 2 different recipes of bourbon. And where there's 2 recipes, there's got to be a minimum of 2 barrels going together. This is going to be more like that previous blend of about 30 barrels, but the 2 recipes getting blended together, one of them is the 72% corn that we use for the other bourbons. But the other mash bill that we're blending in was the first bourbon that we put out. It contained a lot less corn, a lot more malt. We still had some of those old barrels hanging around, getting older. And at this point, we didn't want to put out 2 conflicting bourbons. So somebody higher up the ladder had a good idea of, let's just blend some of these older barrels with some of these newer barrels, see what happens. We've done 12 batches of it so far. It's been a very big success for us. This one that we're tasting today is batch number 10, and it came in at 114.6 proof. Double black label here is the Maple Stout Finished Bourbon. In the wintertime, we do a maple stout beer. It ages for 18 months inside maple syrup bourbon barrels. It's a really good wintertime beer. When that beer goes on the canning line, we keep the barrel that it's sitting in. And we put our Kentucky straight bourbon, the bottle in the middle over here, we put it back inside that barrel that aged the stout, let it sit for another year or so. So this maple, don't think about like pancakes when you're sipping on it. It's a very subtle maple flavor. The beer takes on most of the maple. This just gets a lot more of the sweetness. It's a lot richer and deeper sweetness compared to our straight bourbon. And it's proofed a little bit higher at 94 proof compared to the 90. And then last but not least, from Town Branch, we've got our overproof whiskey. This one is my favorite right now. This is a blend of a few different styles of whiskey. 70% of it is our bourbon, our Kentucky straight bourbon. 10% of it is a rye whiskey. 10% of it is a double oaked whiskey. And 10% of it is an unreleased wheated bourbon whiskey. We blend all those together. We add water till it's 104 proof. We switched up the bottle on this one. All the square bottles are imported from France, and they're very nice display pieces. They look great on the bar, but if you're working in a bar, they're a little bottom heavy, they're a little bit unwieldy sometimes. So for the newer product, we wanted to do a slimmer, sleeker bottle to kind of cater toward the bartenders and cocktail enthusiasts out there in the world. But don't think of this as just a cocktail bottle. I like it a lot. I've got a bottle of it at the house. I just sip it straight. You don't need to mix it with a cocktail, but it stands up really well in a cocktail. And then last but not least, I've got a couple of options from Dublin. There is a dry gin from Dublin. That's going to be most similar to like a Beefeater gin, a dry, juniper forward, good martini builder. And then I've got the very popular rhubarb gin. All the botanicals for this one are listed out on the side. This one's unique because obviously it's pink. It gets its pink color because we're not cutting it with water. Most gins are cut with water and they stay clear. This one's cut with freshly pressed rhubarb juice, which is going to give it the pink hue. It's going to give it a whole lot of tartness. So this with some lemonade, some club soda, some Fresca, makes a really great summertime cocktail. And I'm not really a gin guy, but I like this one. Now it's going to work just like before, except we don't have spittoons to drop our tokens in. Now this time we've got nice little candle jars. So just like before, you come up to me, let me know which of the bottles you want to taste. I'll pour up a good sample for you to split around if you want. We've got ice cubes in the copper pot. There is water in the tower if you need a cleanser in between your drinks. Help yourself to all that stuff. This is the last place you can spend the tokens. And once you spend them, you do have that freebie still coming your way. This is a coffee concentrate. I would not drink it straight. This stuff is very thick because it's got vanilla and sugar and sugar and sugar and sugar and sugar and a little bit more sugar. And with how thick it is, you can tell you don't want to just pour this straight into a cup and start drinking away. But you can put it straight into coffee. You can put it in ice cream. You can put it on brownies, tiramisu, cheesecake. You can play with it a bunch of different ways. But if you want the cocktail that it is made for, we're going to add in 2 parts boiling hot water. And I will say that again, this is boiling hot water, so even though it is in a shot glass, it is not a shooter. I would recommend that you sip on this. The hot water is going to break up all that thickness of the coffee concentrate, get all those flavors rolling around. Once we've added in 2 parts boiling hot water, we take an inverted spoon. Looks like a regular spoon, but it's not. It's fancy. It's inverted. We'll take that inverted spoon, we'll hold it on top of the glass, and we're going to float a little heavy whipping cream right over the back of that spoon. This heavy whipping cream is imported all the way from Walmart, sometimes from Kroger. Depends on where the deals are at. But the trick with the spoon is going to make it resemble a freshly poured mini Guinness, which is by design a nod back to our Irish heritage here. This was designed by Mrs. Lyons for the World Equestrian Games. It took place here in Lexington a little over a decade ago. So these guys don't cost you a thing. These are free, my treat to you all. Just remember, they're good and hot, so don't shoot them straight back. You're welcome. I think I got enough for everybody. I did a quick